Hello, everyone. Welcome to Embodied Exploration. And this is a new form of dialogue that I am trying to um, start with. We are, BK here, my co-founder. We are starting a nonprofit project called The Present of Work, where we invite all of us to reimagine what work can be for ourselves, for our loved ones, and for society as a whole. So we really want to dive into the full spectrum of the human experience of work on the, psychological dimension, sociological dimension, spiritual dimension, physical dimension, because oftentimes we find the human experience of work is very narrowed into a very transactional, very linear kind of process. And so this embodied exploration is an attempt to to have like to have exploration that is quite different from what we typically see in the public discourse. Oftentimes, we see in public discourse on social media, it's either polarized debates or people trying to convince each other their own point of view, people trying to sell other people their own points of view. Um, people like the in the typical panel kind of conversation, it's the experts, wearing all kinds of hats to teach people, oh, you should do this and you should do that. Or oftentimes in panel discussions, people kind of like just stay on the surface to nod and agree with each other, but then they don't actually surface deeper differences, so that we don't really get to learn a lot. And then therefore, Benjamin, yeah, would you please share that? I just have one slide to talk about the intention of today's exploration. Um, the reason I call it embodied exploration is because we don't want to just stay in the theory to say, oh, I know this. Of course I know this, but I can't do it. I can't really put it in practice. So I want to invite all of us to explore what embodied exploration means. And then the vibe and the intention is, to be in a dialogue to really learn with other fellow humans, rather than trying to sell things or pitch things or convince others. And sometimes it's really about trying on other people's perspectives before we judge it to be right or wrong. The second intention is really about exploring wherever feels alive without being constrained by our egos, by our limiting beliefs, or need to please others or need to conform. And the last intention is about practicing embodying our values rather than professing them. So this is again, this embodiment is if I say I value curiosity, how can I actually embody that in a conversation, in an exploration, rather than just tell people I'm curious. So the first hour will be recorded for public sharing, and the last 45 minutes will not be recorded. And so us will have an intimate exploration into whatever is of interest. All right. So Benjamin, yeah, you can stop sharing now, and let's put the guests in the fishbowl on the in the spotlight, please. So I will invite Kay. I will invite Benjamin. Um, and also, I'll just say this dialogue format, we also have a role called the poet. So half an hour into our conversation, so the poet will be paying attention to the audience. If anyone in the audience have if anyone in the audience have a question or comment or want the conversation to go somewhere, please put that in the chat. And the poet will pay attention to both what's going on in the fishbowl and what's going on outside of the fishbowl. And half an hour into the conversation, we'll invite the poet who, BK is gonna play the poet role today. So BK will come in and, spend about 3 to 5 minutes to share what is going on, in our space, both inside the fishbowl and outside, and also to really nudge us who are inside the fishbowl to go deeper, to be more real,
BK will
to
be the
not.
poet of the session.
Oh, wait. Yeah, because yes. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, so to go deeper and yeah, to go where the audience want us to go. So, yeah, without further ado, any questions? All right. And I already said my intention for this dialogue, for this exploration. I also want to invite Kay and Benjamin if you have any intention for this session.
Benjamin, you want to go first?
Or, um, well, I was sharing with Kay and Carol just as we were chatting before folks arrived that stepping into this conversation, I feel much less like an expert or even like I'm bringing with me um, previously constructed thoughts that I'm excited to share with people. I feel a lot more like the topic, something about chaos. What is chaos? What does chaos feel like? What is its role in my life, in work? Um, Something about those questions resonates very deeply for me. And so I'm interested in exploring that and using this space as, a medium for my own learning process.
Great. Yeah, and my intention is to be here learning from other people as well as kind of playing around in my mind with Dancing with Chaos as an organization and what that really means. When I think of chaos, I think of certain things at certain levels, like, at home, at work, out in the world, that kind of thing. But there's also a lot of internal chaos that really, is like my response, or it's something I'm just generating. So I really look forward to talking about that dance with myself, really, and how to not join or fight with the chaos, but try to dance with it from a different perspective. And I would love to understand more about what that means for other people and if it's similar and different and how I might be able to interpret other positive ways to dance, maybe add some new dances. So that's my
Yeah, thank you, Kay. And actually, just now, Meg gave me an idea in the chat, a private chat. She said, "Oh, what if I also invite everyone in the audience to just share your intention, your question in the chat if you want. It's not obligated." And yeah. So, and also, I just want to say, while we're in the dialogue, I personally would not pay attention to the chat. I want to focus on going deeper with the people inside the fishbowl, but at some point, we'll channel that into. All right. Maybe we have a just one round of sharing a burning question that we're holding for each of us. And then after that, we can just flow from there. It is very emergent. There's no turn taking after that. We're just gonna see if we either build on each other or either we want to say, oh, this is what I actually really differ. And we explore the difference or the tensions when they arise. So who would like to start with your burning question around this topic, dancing with chaos at work?
Carol, forgive me. So I'm new to this format also.
Mhm.
I don't know if any of you are, but Frank had a question in the chat when you invited intention.
Mm,
Do you want to go address that now, or are we? I mean, it's part of what I would want to talk about anyway, but
sure. Sure, yeah. Then just have that as your burning question.
okay.
I might not pay attention to the chat, because I just, my attention go this way,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
each of us are different. So feel
yeah.
free to weave, whatever thread, um, if it feels alive.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, it's funny. I'll just say a few words. What is chaos was, I think, something I said in my intention earlier, because chaos to me means a general sense of mayhem. I mean, to everyone can understand sort of what they envision, chaos to be. These days, sometimes I tell people I feel like my head is a washing machine. I mean, that's sort of one form of chaos
Yeah.
when I'm trying to think about a lot of things and keep a lot on my plate. But I think in a recent discussion I had, chaos can be really all the way up through, including side to side, just thoughts about what someone means. In other words, what a manager might say that kind of throws us off our game, or
Mm.
points us in a direction of like task switching, when we were really, embedded or sort of flowing in a different way. I know there's a lot of chaos for me personally in my home because of health issues that are going on. And so they collide, if you will,
Yeah.
with chaos internally and externally. So I often actually describe it either as a tornado kind of feeling, or also like a hurricane, that you can, when you stand under the eye of a hurricane, everything is really still. And you can see the chaos like swirling around it. When I was really little, a very bad tornado hit, hurricane hit Long Island, and I was like 6, and I ran outside when it got very quiet, thinking, oh, this is really cool. And my father came out and grabbed me because he knew the other side of the winds were about to hit me. And but I thought it was so cool in that moment that even in this chaos, this mayhem of the storm, everything could be completely still and quiet. And so I think of chaos sometimes as the contrast we need to find our stillness, if that makes sense.
Mm, yeah. So, okay, to follow on that, what is your burning question um, when you are exploring your relationship to chaos at work, or, you know, yeah. And while letting you think about that, I'll name my burning question. Um, yeah, is how might how might I think sometimes the moment I define it as chaos, maybe it's already a little too late. I don't know. I don't know if it's, but it's like, how do I see life? How do I see the dynamics in my life so that I can have a different relationship to chaos? and also in the work context. But yeah, so that's just a broad thing that I'm exploring for myself. Yeah. How about you, Benjamin? And then we'll go back to Kay.
Yeah, it's still not fully formulated, but it's something in the direction. I think chaos has a bad rep
Mm,
for good reasons. But I think it has a bad rep. And I wonder, is there some frame shift? Is there another way of holding chaos or understanding chaos, less as a purely negative,
mm.
um, but more almost like archetypal, like as like a base force or a part of the world that we find ourselves in, which actually affords us more options or more agency or more something in how we relate with chaos, how we manage it, how we wield it, how we dance with it.
So I love that you brought that up, Benjamin, because the way I first envisioned chaos was I've been thinking about this forever, but we are really children of chaos, right? We know chaos well, right? We are the stuff of stars, and that only happens when big, huge things are crashing into each other, throwing off stuff, lots of gases, and it's a very, very, very chaotic situation. But as children of it, that's where we come from. So that level of movement um, is something we know well. And I really believe in my heart of hearts, the burning question is how do we make contact with that part of us that sort of pushes us to find stillness, as I said before, but also just answers to problems or new questions to ask, because that requires a kind of movement that to me it feels like is sparked by our primordial roots, really. um so back to how would I define chaos, just really quickly to Frank's question, I would define it as our dance partner, really. um we can't it's like you can't have stillness without chaos, you can't, or movement of sorts. um and when it gets really intense, obviously we use the term chaos, but yeah, I think of it as a very it what I'm trying to do is to show that we can make life a lot better if we step back from what we think chaos is and how it affects us, and it does affect us, um, and find a rhythm with it. Try to find some kind of rhythm that is more synchronous, really, with who we are. And that's kind of another part to that burning question.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, that rhythm, I think so to make it really concrete for myself. I notice whenever I feel chaos coming, it's most likely when I was operating at a certain pace. But then this other thing almost give me a jolt and force me to rush to speed up or force me to sometimes even slow down too much. Like it's that contrast. I'll give a very uh, concrete example about my work. So I work with organizational leaders, and in this one particular thing, I help this leader, executive director, to convene a whole network of stakeholders. And then she happened to be in a field where is massively impacted by the current new administration in the US. A lot of government funding are cut off. People are just like fighting fires, going from meeting to meeting. And then, so when I and my, collaborator met with her, wow, I can just feel that speed, that need to control. Because at first I didn't know how to make sense of it. I just feel like she was angry. She was not happy with our, you know, how we're doing our work. And so
Mm.
there's, of course, she's the client, and right, so there's that power dynamic. But then, so felt very viscerally in my body, like my heart started to pounce. And then a thought also came to me, is like, oh, they must be really stressed out. Like they all, like my client must also be stressed out. They also mentioned it later, right? So it's not just about their dissatisfaction about my work, but that thought really kind of helped me to see, oh, it's their nervous system acting up. And then of course it impacts my nervous system. It's that difference of pace, right? I just felt, like there is that moment. And I'm glad that I had enough kind of like relational practice. In that moment, I was like, I can feel our nervous system in the room are acting up. And like I have a story, this might be a reflection of the larger field, right? Of the larger system we're trying to convene. So then just by saying that, just by naming my own kind of like nervousness or anxiety, that kind of like helped to bring the temperature down in the room for all of us to kind of just slow down just a little bit so that I might have a chance to kind of like going back to what you said about develop a rhythm, with this part that just feels like foreign and alien and all of a sudden like jolt me. Yeah, so then I think late, like in the next 10 minutes of that meeting, we started to kind of like sink a little bit and a little bit. I mean, yeah, there's still some like feelings kind of afterward, but it was no longer this really big visceral impact. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
And Carol, let me just ask one little follow-up question, which is in that really helpful example. I'm glad that you're bringing in something to ground the conversation. Um, what, how are you seeing or understanding chaos in that example? So, for example, the overwhelm in your client, does that to you seem to be chaos, or are you understanding overwhelm to be created like a byproduct of chaos, or something else?
Um, in that moment, the word chaos didn't come to mind,
Mm-hmm.
but there's very now that I'm trying to make sense of how I was feeling in that moment, is definitely like all over the place, right?
Mm,
Like I have a story, oh, are they not happy about our work? Are they, just stressed out in general? Uh, and then the part of me wants to maybe defend because I also felt they misunderstood. So it's just now looking back, it's very chaotic kind of feelings
mm,
in a very quick kind of just second to second development.
mm,
Um, yeah. And then also I experience chaos this particular experience, I have a little more awareness, kind of like just what Kay was saying, if you're not completely caught in the hurricane, you can actually be stand above and to kind of have that calm to watch the hurricane. So in the example I gave, I was able to kind of like be more in the calm, but
mm,
then but then, going for a different example, for example, in my personal relationship with my spouse, sometimes, like, right, sometimes there's the old patterns and then they just quickly escalate. That
Mhm.
chaos, and sometimes I have less awareness to be in the calm. So to me, it's always this kind of practice. Um,
Mm,
yeah.
mm. Maybe I'll just bring in one or two brief pieces on my end, and then Kay, maybe there's more that's being evoked for you. Also, before I bring them in, I just wanted to note, Kay, when you earlier said, we are the children of chaos.
Mm.
We come from the stars. That really, like that, for in my subjective experience, that really rings true and rang true to me in moment. And I felt
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, like that's part of the conversation that I'm interested in having. The two pieces I'd like to bring in, just some other examples in my work with organizations and leaders, and also just like individuals trying to lead their lives. One of the ways that I often perceive folks to try to manage or deal with chaos is essentially the implementation, one way or another, of qualities that we often associate with the masculine. So I bring in structure, focus, elimination, boundaryness. And I think that this works really effectively in ways. It like makes a lot of sense that we do it, and also it has costs. And sometimes we end up getting caught up in, not kind of a ceiling that we create for ourselves because of the limitations of some of the structures that we bring in. The other example that I'll bring in, I'm just thinking of another domain, psychotherapy. So if you're a clinician working with someone, oftentimes the person coming in, there may be a lot of chaos in their system, or at least things going on that one could refer to as chaotic. And what's interesting as a clinician is that you are, generally speaking, totally agnostic or not personally connected to any of the content that is being brought forward. And so, what this affords you as a clinician or as a space holder is essentially tuning into, depending on what therapy you're practicing, certain qualities in your stance that allow that chaos to present itself, to express, and to kind of follow a natural course. And you're not necessarily trying to contain the chaos in that moment or to even inject a new, desired behavior. Oftentimes you're leaning in with just like profound spaciousness and love and understanding. You're kind of meeting the chaos where it is. You have the resources such that the chaos is okay in that moment. And through being okay and being able to relate with it more deeply, you actually find that that chaos will tend to run some course where some new understanding, or we could even say order, may show up on the other side.
Yeah, thank you, Benjamin. Just as the host, I'm looking at the time. So I noticed, Benjamin, you brought up two themes, and I want to make sure we can also explore that. And in addition, I want to invite our poet, BK, into the spotlight to kind of, maybe be a conduit to channel what are some of the musings in the audience and also from yourself, BK. And yeah, and then we'll continue our conversation after that. Oh, Benjamin, would you please put BK? Oh, yeah, maybe I can. Yeah.
Hello. Wonderful discussion. Um, I've been taking a lot of notes and I resonate with a lot of the language or imaging being shared. I tried to draw some of it. I don't know if my blur, to turn off my blur for a second. I tried to put a head in a washing machine today. I don't know if it came through.
Yeah,
Yeah, now we can see it.
good enough.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed that metaphor. But I have a poem that I'll just read and I'll return the floor to you. Eye of Chaos. Star-born creatures of primordial fire, our minds in washing machines tumbling wild, finding stillness only in the contrast. Children of chaos breathing in the eye. The tornado within mirrors the tornado without. You can't have movement without chaos. Yet when things get intense, we name it disorder. Our dance partner, our dance partner, we've feared yet always needed. Punctuated equilibrium breaks habit patterns. Structures we bring in collapse and reform. We always have the resources needed in every moment, order showing up in unexpected ways. Speed shifts perception, moving at different rates. The phase shift needed to understand what happens when we stand inside the storm and discover serenity at destruction's center. Above the spiral's fury lies sudden clarity. We need not slower chaos, but different eyes. We are the stuff of stars, learning new patterns as we learn to dance with what we cannot control.
Oh my God, that really touched my heart.
Thank you, BK.
You're definitely better than ChatGPT.
Don't tell ChatGPT that.
All right. BK, do you feel complete? Shall I remove the spotlight?
Yeah, I my provocation. Hmm, yeah, I do sense there's I do like the examples to make it more concrete. And if there are things we're not thinking about when it comes to chaos, yeah, I think I'd invite you all to share more there.
Thank you.
Well, like, is it
Sure.
time? Okay.
Go for
Um,
it.
yeah, I can give you an interesting concrete example, but I just wanted to get back to some of the other shared thoughts because they made me think of a couple of other things that are very important to me, at least when I think of chaos. So some of you might know, I don't know. But the other side, I'm basically technology and relationships, but I have a very lifelong relationship with contemplative traditions, wisdom traditions. I like to learn about them. I like to know what the ancients, how they survived, how they even, made it through when the world was new. And in a lot of that work, I often remind myself that there are other ways of knowing, right? So, I tend to think, actually a good friend of mine said, Karen, you're not a brain on a stick. Like there's this whole person there. And we can know things. We know, some say we know 95% of what we know through those channels. And so I think, Carol, when you said like step back or whatever, we can find, and there's a note in the chat about like rituals and things like that. There are things that I've created for myself to systemically dance more easily, more slowly. As Carol said, by learning from the ancients, really, because they really, in my review of them so far, had amazing ways to dance with chaos very peacefully, actually, tens of thousands of years ago. So I get a lot. I get a lot from that. So the other ways of knowing I really put into practice, just a very quick example. I've shared with some of you, but most of the past 5 years, since the COVID crisis began, I got a call from a colleague of mine who asked me if I would join it's kind of like a core team, um, or inner circle kind of people who were quasi-governmental people who were trying to address COVID and in the time of the emergency. And this person felt that my other work around relationships and clarity of communication and collaboration and my analytics there would be helpful. So I've been working for the past 4.5 years now, in that space, with an official as an advisor, sort of dealing with a lot of things, COVID, AI, and other things. So that's the background. But what I want to tell you is that I've never met him in person, not ever. And it reminds me, and when I reminded him of that the other day, he was like, really? Like, so in the chaos of what was going on, and in the chaos of, working virtually on important things, I actually pulled back. And I was conscious of doing this, of like giving him more space and time to talk, because virtually it's kind of hard sometimes, not to jump in, or for me anyway. Um, and I think that was sort of one way I built calm and also trust with him to really dance with the chaos, because he was really in, as you can imagine, some very serious situations. And from that, I learned, with other clients calling me at that time, that was one way to dance with the chaos, was just to be very aware that I needed to open more space and listen very carefully and make it seamless, make the technology seamless. It didn't really matter. It was just the way I tried to handle the conversation. Um, so to me, that was dancing with chaos on many, many dimensions. But just being aware, I guess, to net it all out. And I see another comment. But just to net it all out, I think the first step for me, and I find others say this, is just to be aware that, I think, Carol, you said that we have to find a different relationship with chaos, because it's just always here now, kind of. So being aware and keeping that conscious in sort of every situation, I find, for me, just helps me slow down, just becoming aware. So sorry if I
Yeah.
took too long, but
Yeah, to build on what you said and connect to Benjamin's earlier point, it seems like to develop a different relationship with chaos is about switching from this control-oriented relationship. Because Benjamin, I think before BK, before the poet, spoke, you were talking about this masculine approach, or this, stereotypical masculine approach about control, tamp it down, no chaos, structure, you know. So that's one relationship to chaos. And then I think, Kay, what you're alluding to is a different relationship. Because in the first masculine, relationship, maybe being aware is not that useful, right? Being aware, like you want to prevent it, preempt chaos. You want to have structure so that there's no chaos, right? You don't need to be aware in some ways, right? But then if it's a different relationship, It's about dancing with chaos. It's about like treating chaos as a partner.
Right.
Then you have to be aware because then you have to like I don't dance a lot, but I love dancing. Like I really need to sense into my partner's energy if it's a pair, dance. Like I need whether I'm leading, but most like, most of the time, the man leads in salsa. That's the dance I do. I need to like listen to the lead, like sense into the energy. So yeah, it's a very different relationship. There, the awareness is really, really important, is really key. But I think sometimes it just in our dominant culture, this control-based relationship, preempt, right? Like is so dominant that to think to treat chaos as a dancing partner seems just really scary, I think, for most people, myself included. But I'm kind of like doing the switch now.
And I might just add one thing in conjunction with what you just shared, Carol, which is kind of the shift from we may have some sense that there's some way we've approached working with chaos historically, and there's some shift that's possible or that's happening or that we want. And um, we could have a really long, in-depth conversation investigating how do we understand ourselves to have worked with chaos historically. One simplified model I said earlier, I feel like sometimes we use qualities that we can associate with the masculine. And the thing that I wanted to add is while it may be the case that for some people or some organizations in certain contexts, they do go from control to no control or control to something else, listening, responsiveness, whatever. I actually feel like a description of the shift that feels a little bit more compelling to me is from something like fixation on control towards something like attunement and discernment, which requires listening and sensitivity, but also like when you're dancing salsa with someone, if the two of you are dancing well, you're both really attuned, you're both discerning what's happening, but also like the lead is controlling, like there is control and structure there, and it's essential for it to be there.
Right. So it's not completely get rid of control,
Hmm.
but it's this.
How do we hold it?
Yeah.
That is really, really interesting what you said, because when I listen to those words like there is someone in control when they're dancing, it's absolutely true, right? In terms of the lead, okay, now we're going here, now we're going there, whatever. But again, there's this other way of knowing that we can tap into. And we don't have to, I think our words are very important right now for many, many reasons, which I won't get into here. But labeling anything about dancing as being in control sort of makes it feel heavier to me.
Mm.
Dancing just seems like symbiotic and very, very open to screwing up. And who
Mm.
cares? Right. So I think we talked about this once, but I mean, when you dance, if like you miss a step or you stumble and you fall down, everybody's laughing. And it's just a more lightness of being, right? For me, when I put things into the context of a dance, as opposed to like, okay, a process and it has to be control and structured and A after B and so on, or something like that, which you can definitely feel the control. Talk about like embodied intention. Like I can feel when someone's trying to control something,
Mm.
right? I feel it. Not just know it kind of in my head. But kind of the point for me. And I'm like Elaine on like Seinfeld, if you ever saw me dance. I don't know if you guys watch Seinfeld, but she wasn't very good. Uh, but that's kind of me. But I don't care. Like I let go of control. Like who
Mm.
cares? I'm just kind of, having fun, even though someone looking at me is probably going, oh gosh, she probably needs some dance lessons. Um, yeah. So it comes back to that other way of knowing or other way of framing. Because, with all these multiple chaotic things, reframing, paradigm shifts, all this stuff that we read about that comes up. To do that, I think for me, I have to loosen up, and loosening up means, yeah, finding chaos as my partner.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it really kind of like brought up something, some clarity to me. And also I've noticed it's probably time for us to have a closing round, so that then we can open up the space for everyone in the audience. So I'm gonna start the closing round that builds on what Kay was just saying. Kay, when I was hearing you talk about the type of dance that you enjoy, it really brought to mind an opposite form of like when I was a kid, I was learning like the choreographed dance, right? It is really very much everybody has to be in sync, and everybody has to be beautiful. You can't make mistakes, and right. So yeah, so there is even, how we approach dance is very different. And then when I was trying on that type of dance, I noticed, you know, outside of those the dance I did in childhood, there's an inner thing about, oh, how would other people see me? Oh, I don't want to look clumsy. I don't want to look unskilled, right? So it's those kind of inner tendencies that made me actually more rigid when I'm encountering chaos or unpredicted patterns from the dance partner. And so yeah, so what you said just helped me to actually really go deeper into me to see what kind of inner habits made me more rigid, you know, um, yeah, so that might be something we can explore deeper, after the when we conclude our inner circle. How about you two? Closing thoughts?
You feel ready, Kay?
Oh yeah, sure. Uh, First of all, I'd like to thank you, Carol, as we close this part, because I wasn't, as you know, wasn't sure how this was going to work. So it really works well. I've really enjoyed this part, and I know we have more. I think for me, I've loved this conversation because chaos, it felt like it stretched out more fully into other things for me. I mean, when I'm sitting here thinking about Dancing with Chaos and oh, what we could do and so on, and talking to a lot of people, um, I think people have different versions of chaos, have different ideas of chaos, and so forth. And the notion that we are children of chaos helps, I think, most people to sort of get some bearing, but still, chaos lives in multiple dimensions. And loosening up our idea, maybe, of a hurricane or a tornado is actually, I think, going to be for me a very positive exercise.
Hmm.
And maybe like look at the tornado from underneath the tornado or from above it, below, you know what I mean? Just take different snapshots of different ways I've thought about chaos so far, because all of the things that have been said have really made me feel fuller. And I'm gonna let Frank, if you feel like it, Frank, ask your question or comment in the next part of the session.
Yeah.
So I think that's it for me right now.
Okay, I can check out then. As Carol mentioned at the beginning, yesterday we did a session kind of like this one, although there were more folks in the fishbowl. And I felt something akin to chaos insofar as there was like more going on than I could track, more going on in more directions and dimensions. And I felt kind of like stretched, overstretched, or split, or kind of incoherent. Um, and I found today I had a very different experience. I really felt able to um, stay in contact with each of you and with what each of us were sharing. So just on a kind of a structural level, I'm like enjoying and appreciating that. Um, and there seems to be some connection here to like, when we find ourselves inevitably having or not having the internal resources to kind of meet whatever chaos we are finding outside of ourselves. And I think that it's, kind of collectively, it's the instances where we don't and we don't quite know what to do. There's kind of chaos going on, but also it's evoking something like chaos in myself, and I don't actually know what to do with it. It's not really clear what to do other than like take a breather. Um, so yeah, that seems to be there's a spot there that feels like my learning edge and some collective learning edge, and feels meaningful to have just gotten a little bit more surface area on it today.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kay. Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, our poet BK. And I will conclude this part of the dialogue, and I'll stop recording, and we'll open up for the interactions among all of us.